The night began with elegance that hid something dangerously unstable beneath its surface. In downtown Chicago, glass towers reflected a calm sky that promised nothing unusual. Olivia Mercer stood in her penthouse above the city, watching light bend across the river. She moved through her kitchen with quiet precision, preparing black espresso without distraction. Her life was built on control, discipline, and an unwillingness to be underestimated by anyone. Mercer Capital Partners, her firm, managed billions in private equity across multiple industries nationwide. Every decision she made carried weight, yet she rarely allowed emotion to interfere with judgment. That morning, she reviewed a final acquisition involving Whitmore Infrastructure Group. The deal would close at over $1 billion, scheduled for signature within 48 hours. At the center of it all stood Jonathan Whitmore, a rising developer with political connections. He had invited Olivia to his wedding as a professional courtesy before finalizing their agreement. They had never met in person, only spoken through lawyers and carefully structured conference calls. Olivia preferred it that way, keeping perception controlled until she chose otherwise. Her attorney, Denise Carter, called with a tone that suggested concern beneath professional restraint. "That family doesn't welcome outsiders easily," Denise warned quietly over the phone. Olivia responded calmly, saying she had survived far more hostile boardrooms than weddings. Still, she agreed to bring her security advisor, Marcus Reed, a former Marine. By midday, she wore a midnight blue gown designed to signal authority without excess. Her reflection showed a woman who did not ask for space, but naturally occupied it. They drove beyond Chicago into rolling estates where wealth felt inherited rather than earned. Whitmore Manor rose behind iron gates, surrounded by perfection that felt rehearsed rather than lived. Inside, guests arrived in curated fashion, each smile calibrated for social performance. Olivia stepped out, sensing immediately that she was already being observed differently. Something subtle shifted in the air, as though her presence disrupted an unspoken order. And before she even crossed the threshold, she could feel tension waiting to erupt. A decision inside those walls was already forming, one that no one understood yet. And it would begin with a single moment of recognition that turned into humiliation. The Whitmore estate buzzed with polished conversation and carefully maintained appearances. Olivia moved through the entrance beside Marcus, who scanned every angle without drawing attention. Guests in designer suits and gowns filled the hall like a curated exhibition of status. A coordinator approached them near the gate, clipboard in hand, and forced hospitality on her face. Her eyes briefly lingered on Olivia's presence, measuring before acknowledging. "Are you part of the catering staff?" she asked casually, without verifying anything else. Marcus exhaled quietly, but Olivia raised a hand slightly to keep him from reacting. She presented her invitation without emotion, letting the paper speak louder than her response. The coordinator's expression shifted instantly, awkward recognition replacing misplaced assumption. Apologies followed quickly, but without sincerity, more reflex than respect. Olivia said nothing in return and continued walking forward with steady composure. Inside, the ceremony had already begun beneath a floral arch in open sunlight. Jonathan Whitmore stood at the front, adjusting his cufflinks with visible nervousness. His bride, Claire Whitmore, wore confidence like something inherited rather than earned. Olivia observed Jonathan closely, analyzing posture, hesitation, and unspoken uncertainty. Every detail mattered, because he was the man behind a billion-dollar decision. Guests clapped as vows concluded, champagne waiting immediately afterward. Olivia accepted a glass but did not drink, preferring observation over participation. Whispers followed her movement, subtle but persistent across clustered conversations. She introduced herself only as Olivia, avoiding titles that would shift perception too quickly. Most people nodded politely before looking away, uninterested in unknown significance. Claire noticed her presence eventually, eyes narrowing with controlled curiosity. Something about Olivia disrupted the expected hierarchy of the room. A quiet decision formed in Claire's expression, unnoticed by most around her. She set her glass down and began walking with deliberate confidence. And in that moment, the atmosphere changed without anyone realizing why yet. Claire Whitmore crossed the ballroom with the confidence of someone used to obedience. Guests subtly shifted aside, creating space without questioning her intention. Her gaze locked onto Olivia, sharp and measuring like a private judgment. Marcus stepped slightly forward, but Olivia signaled him to remain still. Claire stopped close enough for every nearby guest to hear the conversation clearly. "I don't remember inviting you," she said calmly with a thin smile. Olivia replied evenly, stating she had been invited directly by Jonathan Whitmore. A brief silence followed, tension tightening across nearby conversations. Claire laughed softly, dismissing the claim without checking any details. She circled Olivia slowly, studying her gown with deliberate suspicion. "That dress doesn't belong here," Claire said, voice sharpening with growing hostility. Olivia did not react, maintaining steady eye contact without escalation. "Where did you get it?" Claire continued, tone becoming more cutting. Guests nearby stopped pretending not to listen, attention shifting toward the exchange. Olivia finally spoke, calm but firm, asking Claire to end the conversation. That request only intensified Claire's expression, pride overriding restraint. Without warning, Claire grabbed the edge of Olivia's sleeve. Fabric tore sharply, echoing through the nearby silence like a fracture. Conversation across the ballroom halted instantly, attention snapping toward the sound. Claire held the torn fabric up with visible satisfaction. "This is what happens when people pretend they belong," she said loudly. Olivia looked at the tear, then back at Claire without visible emotion. Marcus took a half step forward again, jaw tightening in controlled restraint. Guests froze, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent observers. Olivia bent slowly, retrieving the torn piece from the floor with precision. She placed it inside her clutch, as if preserving evidence rather than clothing. And in that silence, something irreversible began to take shape. The ballroom held its breath as Olivia stood with controlled stillness. Jonathan Whitmore pushed through the crowd, confusion already forming on his face. He looked between Claire and Olivia, trying to understand the disruption. Claire spoke first, claiming Olivia had no rightful place in the event. Jonathan hesitated, uncertainty replacing the confidence he carried earlier. Olivia simply stated she had been personally invited by him months earlier. Jonathan's expression shifted, recognition slowly breaking through denial. He confirmed quietly that he had indeed extended the invitation. Claire's face tightened, anger rising beneath forced composure. She dismissed Jonathan's confirmation, insisting Olivia did not belong in their world. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing a shift in control. Jonathan attempted to de-escalate, but his voice lacked authority. Olivia observed the dynamic carefully, recognizing weakness behind inherited status. Claire turned back toward Olivia, voice now louder and less controlled. She accused Olivia of manipulation and deception in front of everyone. Marcus stepped closer, no longer waiting for permission to intervene. Olivia raised her hand again, stopping escalation before it expanded further. She looked at Jonathan directly, studying the cost of his silence. He avoided her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. That hesitation confirmed everything Olivia needed to understand. She adjusted her posture, preparing to leave the center of attention. But Claire stepped forward again, refusing to let the moment end. What followed was not planned, but it was inevitable. Claire poured champagne over Olivia's shoulder without warning. The liquid spread across silk, heavy and deliberate in its humiliation. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as guests finally reacted, and Olivia remained perfectly still, absorbing the moment completely. Champagne dripped from Olivia's gown as silence collapsed into shock. Claire smiled as if she had restored order through public correction. Guests stood frozen, unwilling to intervene or acknowledge what they witnessed. Jonathan took a step forward, then stopped again, torn between loyalty and fear. Olivia finally looked up, expression unchanged but noticeably colder. She did not respond immediately, allowing the moment to settle fully. Marcus moved closer, preparing to remove her from the environment if necessary. Olivia signaled again for restraint, maintaining control over escalation. Claire spoke again, declaring that respect required knowing one's place. Her voice carried across the room, reinforced by inherited confidence. Olivia slowly reached for her clutch, retrieving the torn fabric piece. She examined it briefly, then returned it with deliberate care inside. Jonathan finally spoke, attempting weak correction of his bride's actions. But his words lacked conviction, dissolving before they reached impact. Olivia addressed him directly, her tone calm but structurally final. She questioned whether leadership could exist without accountability. Jonathan had no answer, only silence and avoidance. The ballroom felt heavier, as though the air itself had changed density. Olivia stated she would be leaving immediately. Claire laughed again, assuming victory in her interpretation of events. Guests watched as Olivia turned toward the exit without hesitation, but before she reached the doors, security presence shifted outside. A vehicle arrived, carrying someone no one had yet considered important. The consequences of the evening were only beginning to surface. And inside Jonathan's hesitation, something far larger was already breaking. Olivia stepped into the evening air, the estate lights fading behind her. Marcus walked beside her, assessing surroundings with professional precision. The torn gown moved slightly in the wind, marking visible evidence of the incident. Behind them, laughter from the ballroom continued, as if nothing had changed. Olivia did not look back, maintaining focus on forward movement. Marcus quietly confirmed that their vehicle was still secured nearby. They reached the gravel path leading away from the manor. At that moment, voices called out from behind the estate doors. Jonathan's mother appeared, accompanied by private security personnel. Her tone carried authority shaped by decades of unchallenged social control. She accused Olivia of causing disruption and dishonoring the event. Marcus instinctively shifted forward again, but Olivia remained composed. The accusation escalated quickly into claims of theft and trespassing. Guests began gathering at a distance, watching the confrontation unfold. Olivia stood still, absorbing every word without visible reaction. Then she calmly denied all allegations with precise clarity. Her attorney had already been informed earlier that evening. The mention of legal involvement shifted the energy slightly. Security hesitated, unsure of jurisdiction or appropriate action. A call was made to local authorities without further verification. Olivia remained grounded, understanding exactly how quickly perception could be manipulated. Marcus began recording discreetly, documenting every interaction. The estate lights flickered against growing tension between both sides, and then distant sirens broke the calm landscape. What arrived next would expose more than just a misunderstanding. It would reveal how quickly status collapses under real accountability. Police lights cut through the estate driveway minutes later. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene with immediate assumptions forming. Jonathan's mother approached them first, speaking with controlled urgency. Her version of events framed Olivia as an intruder. The officers shifted their attention toward Olivia without asking detailed questions. Marcus identified himself, attempting to clarify the situation professionally. Olivia provided identification without resistance or emotional reaction. The officers examined it briefly, but did not verify further context. They requested Olivia's belongings, including her clutch. Olivia refused, citing lack of legal grounds for search. Tension increased as procedural boundaries began to blur. One officer took the clutch without consent, escalating the situation instantly. Marcus began recording more openly, documenting the procedural violation. Jonathan appeared in the background, visibly unsettled but silent. Claire watched from the steps, expression unchanged and confident. The clutch was opened, revealing personal items and the torn fabric. Interpretations were made immediately, without objective investigation. Olivia explained the origin of the torn material clearly. Her explanation was dismissed without verification. The atmosphere shifted from social conflict to legal exposure. Guests gathered further away, capturing footage on their phones. Whispers spread quickly across the estate grounds. Then a final call was made, summoning senior representation. A black vehicle arrived shortly after, entering the estate with authority. Someone inside that vehicle would change the entire direction of events, and Jonathan Whitmore was about to realize the cost of assumption. A senior executive stepped out of the arriving vehicle with quiet authority. His presence immediately altered the behavior of everyone observing. He walked directly toward Olivia without acknowledging the surrounding officers. Marcus stepped aside slightly, recognizing institutional hierarchy instantly. The executive greeted Olivia by name with professional respect. That recognition alone shifted the tone of the entire scene. He confirmed her identity as CEO of Mercer Capital Partners. The officers froze, processing information they had previously ignored. Jonathan's expression changed rapidly as understanding replaced confusion. Claire's confidence faltered for the first time that evening. The executive explained the scale of Olivia's financial authority. Her firm managed assets exceeding multiple billions across sectors. The deal tied to Jonathan's company depended entirely on her approval. Silence spread through the estate grounds like a pressure wave. The officers stepped back slightly, reassessing their earlier actions. Jonathan approached slowly, realizing the structural imbalance now exposed. Olivia remained composed, observing the shift without satisfaction or anger. The executive requested immediate cessation of all detainment actions. Legal consequences were implied with calm precision rather than threat. Security personnel withdrew subtly, no longer enforcing earlier assumptions. Claire stood motionless, absorbing implications she had not considered. Jonathan finally spoke, voice weakened by realization. He understood the deal was no longer guaranteed. Olivia confirmed nothing, allowing silence to finalize meaning. The evening had crossed from social event into financial collapse, and the consequences were only beginning to reach everyone involved. Jonathan stood in silence as the weight of realization settled over him. The officers stepped aside completely, no longer asserting authority. Claire remained frozen, unable to reframe the situation unfolding before her. Olivia finally addressed Jonathan directly with calm finality. She stated that trust had been irreparably compromised. The investment agreement would be suspended pending full reassessment. Her words were precise, without emotion or unnecessary emphasis. Jonathan attempted to respond, but his voice lacked structure. He tried to explain misunderstanding, but Olivia did not engage. Marcus opened the vehicle door, preparing for departure. The executive confirmed that all documentation would reflect immediate suspension. Claire stepped forward, attempting to regain control of narrative. Her voice now carried desperation rather than confidence. Olivia looked at her briefly, acknowledging the shift in tone. She made no insult, no accusation, only recognition of consequence. Jonathan's mother attempted intervention, but was interrupted by silence. Guests had begun leaving quietly, sensing irreversible change. Phones continued recording, capturing every second of the fallout. The estate that once symbolized control now reflected exposure. Olivia adjusted her sleeve where fabric had been torn earlier. She did not repair it, but she did not acknowledge it further. The vehicle engine started softly in the background. Jonathan realized the partnership that defined his future was ending, and no apology would reverse what had already been decided. Olivia entered the vehicle without looking back at the estate. Marcus closed the door behind her with controlled precision. The engine hummed softly as they pulled away from the property. Behind them, the Whitmore estate lights appeared smaller with each passing moment. Inside the car, silence replaced the tension left behind. Olivia stared forward, processing events without visible emotional disruption. Marcus finally spoke, acknowledging the severity of what had occurred. He confirmed that all actions taken had been recorded properly. Olivia nodded once, still focused on long-term implications. The investment decision now required full board reassessment. Jonathan Whitmore's future stood suspended in unresolved consequence. Back at the estate, guests continued dispersing in fragmented confusion. Claire remained near the entrance, realizing social standing had shifted instantly. Jonathan stood alone near the steps, watching everything unravel. Inside, conversations turned into speculation and reputational concern. The wedding had transformed into a financial and legal incident. Within hours, the story would extend beyond the estate boundaries. Media attention was already forming quietly through shared recordings. Corporate advisors began receiving early inquiries regarding Mercer Capital. Olivia remained silent throughout the drive back to Chicago. Her expression reflected calculation rather than emotional response. Marcus understood that decisions would follow in structured sequence, and the first consequence would arrive before sunrise. Because events like this never remain contained for long, they always expand far beyond the moment they begin. Morning arrived in Chicago with heavy skies and muted light. Olivia reviewed overnight reports from her legal and investment teams. The Whitmore incident had already begun circulating in financial circles. Emails requested clarification, reassurances, and strategic guidance. Denise Carter confirmed media interest was escalating rapidly. Video footage had begun appearing across multiple online platforms. Public interpretation was already forming without official narrative control. Olivia remained focused on internal review rather than reaction. Marcus provided a detailed breakdown of security documentation. Every interaction from the estate had been recorded and preserved. Legal exposure now extended beyond personal incident into corporate risk. Mercer Capital's board requested an emergency briefing. Olivia prepared documentation without emotional commentary. Jonathan Whitmore attempted contact multiple times without response. Each call was redirected through formal channels. Claire Whitmore remained silent publicly as speculation intensified. Her actions were now being analyzed across digital platforms. The Whitmore family reputation began shifting under external scrutiny. Investors connected to the deal began reassessing exposure risk. Olivia understood that perception now carried financial consequences. She authorized controlled release of factual sequence documentation. No interpretation, only verified timeline and evidence. The situation transitioned fully from private incident to public accountability. And the next phase would determine structural outcomes for all parties involved. Nothing about it remained contained or reversible anymore. The media response intensified by mid-week across financial and national outlets. Clips from the Whitmore estate circulated with growing public commentary. Analysts began discussing implications for corporate governance and accountability. Olivia remained absent from public statements, maintaining controlled distance. Denise managed all legal communication with structured precision. Mercer Capital's board convened an emergency governance session. Risk exposure tied to Whitmore infrastructure was formally reassessed. Jonathan Whitmore attempted direct apology through legal intermediaries. The message was acknowledged but not accepted as resolution. Claire withdrew from public visibility entirely during the escalation. Her prior actions became central focus of external scrutiny. Legal counsel for both sides began preparing formal proceedings. Evidence from recorded footage strengthened Olivia's position significantly. Marcus provided full chain of events documentation to internal review. The officers involved faced internal departmental investigation quietly. Financial institutions connected to Whitmore began freezing discussions. Projects under Whitmore infrastructure entered review status. Jonathan experienced immediate contraction of investor confidence. Olivia maintained operational focus on broader portfolio stability. She reallocated internal resources to minimize systemic exposure risk. The situation evolved beyond individual conflict into structural correction. Public narrative continued expanding without centralized control. Olivia remained unchanged in demeanor throughout escalation. And by the end of the week, consequences became fully measurable. Nothing about the original assumptions remained intact. By the second week, the Whitmore collapse accelerated visibly. Construction partners began withdrawing from active project commitments. Credit institutions issued formal notices of increased scrutiny. Jonathan Whitmore's company faced immediate liquidity pressure. Olivia's formal decision to suspend investment became permanent. Denise confirmed legal posture was now defensive rather than exploratory. Claire Whitmore issued no public statement during the crisis. Her absence contributed to growing reputational instability. Media coverage expanded into broader discussions of privilege and consequence. Olivia declined all interview requests, maintaining operational silence. Marcus continued documenting external security implications. Internal Mercer Capital reviews confirmed full withdrawal strategy. Jonathan attempted restructuring proposals through third-party negotiators. Each proposal failed to meet revised risk thresholds. Employees within Whitmore infrastructure began uncertainty-driven departures. Projects slowed as capital support disappeared gradually. Olivia reviewed impact reports without emotional engagement. Her focus remained on protecting institutional stability. The incident at the estate, this now served as reference point for governance failures. Regulatory observers began informal inquiries into conduct standards. Legal exposure for multiple parties expanded across jurisdictions. Claire's earlier actions became central symbolic reference in coverage. Jonathan's leadership credibility continued deteriorating, and the final stage of financial collapse approached inevitability. Nothing remained negotiable at this point. Jonathan sat alone in his office, overlooking a fading skyline. Project files surrounded him, now representing uncertain outcomes. Phone calls had slowed, replaced by silence and unanswered emails. Claire had retreated entirely from public visibility. The marriage itself had become a secondary concern. Financial institutions demanded immediate restructuring or liquidation planning. Jonathan reviewed everything with growing understanding of irreversible damage. He replayed the wedding events repeatedly in his mind. Each detail now carried clearer consequences than before. Olivia's calm response felt increasingly significant in hindsight. Her restraint contrasted sharply with escalating chaos around her. Denise confirmed formal termination of investment relationship. Legal documentation finalized separation from Whitmore Infrastructure. Marcus provided final internal report summarizing all incidents. Mercer Capital closed the chapter officially in internal records. Jonathan attempted one final outreach, receiving no response. Claire remained unreachable, avoiding all communication attempts. Public attention gradually shifted toward other developing stories. However, financial consequences remained deeply embedded. Jonathan began restructuring personal and professional life separately. He acknowledged privately that recovery would take years. Olivia's name no longer appeared in his future projections. Only absence remained where expectation once existed. And the realization settled that reputation cannot be repaired quickly. It can only be rebuilt slowly, if at all. Months passed as consequences stabilized into long-term outcomes. Whitmore Infrastructure officially entered restructuring under financial supervision. Several major projects were sold or cancelled entirely. Jonathan transitioned into advisory roles with reduced influence. Claire withdrew permanently from public social environments. Her previous status circles gradually excluded her presence. Olivia returned focus entirely to Mercer Capital operations. Her firm expanded selectively into more stable infrastructure partnerships. Denise confirmed legal matters had reached closure phases. Marcus resumed standard security oversight without active incident review. Media interest gradually declined but remained archived online. Olivia avoided commentary, maintaining consistent professional distance. The board reviewed internal lessons learned from exposure event. New protocols were implemented for high-risk external engagements. Jonathan issued no further public statements regarding Olivia. Their professional relationship effectively ceased permanently. Claire attempted low-profile re-entry into private consulting circles. Results remained limited due to reputational impact. Olivia occasionally reviewed financial reports reflecting redirected capital. New investments began producing measurable community development outcomes. The original billion-dollar deal was never revisited. Instead, it was replaced entirely by new strategic directions. And the estate incident became internal case study material, a reminder of how quickly perception transforms reality, and how silence can amplify consequences more than speech. 1 year later, Chicago's skyline reflected subtle seasonal change. Olivia stood once again in her penthouse, overlooking the river. Morning light entered the room with familiar quiet rhythm. Her life had returned to structured stability and measured expansion. Mercer Capital had grown into new infrastructure partnerships nationwide. Marcus remained part of her trusted security circle. Denise continued overseeing legal frameworks for expanding operations. The Whitmore incident had faded from public conversation, yet its internal lessons remained embedded within corporate policy. Olivia occasionally reflected on the estate without emotional attachment. She understood the event not as personal conflict, but structural exposure. Jonathan Whitmore's name appeared only in industry footnotes. Claire remained absent from any relevant professional environment. Olivia's redirected investments supported multiple urban development initiatives. Communities impacted by those projects showed measurable improvement. Her foundation work expanded quietly alongside corporate responsibilities. She rarely discussed past events unless required for strategic context. Marcus noted continued stability in all operational environments. The sense of control had returned, refined rather than unchanged. Olivia's decisions now reflected broader systemic awareness, not just financial outcomes but human behavioral consequences. The estate incident remained a reference point in internal training, a lesson about assumption, authority, and unchecked privilege. And life continued forward with deliberate precision, without need for recognition or external validation. Jonathan Whitmore rebuilt his professional identity slowly over time. He stepped away from high-profile development projects entirely. Instead, he focused on smaller regional infrastructure consulting. His reputation remained stable but permanently altered. Claire's public presence remained minimal and inconsistent. Attempts at reintegration into elite social circles failed repeatedly. Olivia expanded Mercer Capital into sustainable infrastructure investment sectors. Her approach emphasized accountability and long-term structural impact. Denise occasionally referenced the Whitmore case in legal seminars. Marcus maintained advisory role in corporate risk environments. Media coverage occasionally resurfaced in retrospective analysis articles. However, public attention had largely moved on. Olivia's leadership style became case study material in business education. Students analyzed her decision-making during crisis scenarios. She declined invitations to comment or lecture publicly. Her preference remained operational focus over narrative ownership. Jonathan occasionally reviewed industry updates, reflecting his reduced influence. He accepted his position without resistance or resentment. Claire remained largely disconnected from professional identity entirely. The estate incident became symbolic rather than active history. Olivia's legacy grew independent of that moment, defined more by what she built afterward than what she endured, and time continued shaping outcomes beyond initial consequences, leaving only structure, memory, and adaptation behind. Several years later, Mercer Capital had expanded nationally. Olivia's influence extended across multiple infrastructure development networks. Her foundation supported legal and economic equity initiatives. Marcus transitioned into strategic advisory for high-level security operations. Denise led a growing legal division focused on corporate governance reform. Jonathan Whitmore had fully transitioned into private consultancy. Claire remained absent from any significant public or corporate role. The Whitmore estate itself was eventually sold and repurposed. Olivia occasionally passed through Chicago's riverfront without reflection on past events. Her perspective had shifted from individual experience to systemic awareness. The incident remained relevant only in institutional training materials. It was studied as an example of bias, assumption, and structural failure. Olivia rarely revisited emotional framing of the event. Instead, she viewed it through strategic and behavioral analysis. Her decisions continued shaping infrastructure development across states. Communities impacted by her investments expanded steadily. Jonathan's name appeared occasionally in project acknowledgements. Claire's legacy remained entirely absent from public records. Olivia's influence became defined by long-term institutional change, not by a single night, but by years of outcomes that followed. And the system around her adapted quietly to her standards, without announcement, without acknowledgement, without resistance, just gradual alignment towards structure and accountability, until the past no longer defined the present at all. On a quiet evening, Olivia reviewed final reports from her office. The city outside moved with steady rhythm beneath fading light. Marcus confirmed all operations remained stable and secure. Denise sent final compliance updates across multiple jurisdictions. Olivia paused briefly, reflecting on long-term transformation, not the incident itself, but everything it revealed afterward. Human behavior under pressure remained her most studied variable. She understood now how quickly perception becomes consequence, and how silence can either protect or enable harm. Her foundation expanded its legal support programs nationwide. Hundreds of cases now moved through structured advocacy systems. Jonathan Whitmore remained professionally distant but stable. Claire remained entirely absent from any relevant narrative space. Olivia no longer measured success through singular financial outcomes. She measured it through structural stability and societal impact. Marcus observed increased calm in her decision-making processes. Denise confirmed continued legal integrity across all operations. Olivia closed her laptop and looked out toward the river. The city reflected light that no longer felt distant or separate. Everything had settled into alignment through consequence and time, and what remained was clarity shaped by experience. No longer reaction, but understanding. No longer silence, but intention, and in that understanding she found lasting equilibrium. Years later, the story of that wedding became something else entirely. Not gossip, not scandal, but a lesson studied in corporate ethics. Olivia Mercer never spoke publicly about it again after interviews ended. Her work through Mercer Capital and her foundation expanded nationwide. Communities impacted by her investments saw measurable structural improvement. Legal frameworks she supported became models in multiple states. Marcus continued serving as trusted advisor in security strategy. Denise led reforms in corporate accountability systems. Jonathan Whitmore lived quietly within reduced professional scope. Claire remained absent from any meaningful public or private influence. The estate where everything began was eventually redeveloped completely. Olivia sometimes passed the area without acknowledging memory or emotion. She had long stopped viewing the event as personal injustice alone. Instead, she saw it as exposure of deeper structural imbalance. One evening, she sat by her window overlooking Chicago's river. Light reflected across the water like fragments of unresolved history. Her phone rang softly with a message from Denise confirming closure updates. Everything had stabilized, legally and operationally, across all dimensions. Olivia placed the phone down and remained still for a moment. She understood now what silence had meant that night. Not absence of voice, but absence of willingness to act. And she built everything afterward on ensuring that silence would not repeat. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.